What's up everyone, this is my masterclass for Victor Polatschek's Advanced Studies for the Clarinet Etude 25. Today we're covering a study in the style of Otto Nicolai's opera Merry Wives of Windsor. As always with the etudes based on larger works, I like to give just a little bit of context before we jump right in. Otto Nicolai was almost an exact contemporary of Frédéric Chopin, and their dates are almost identical. Both died far too young, destroying immense potential for future development in their careers. Nicolai from a stroke only 2 months after the first performance of this piece, the Merry Wives of Windsor. Nicolai had been a child prodigy and later studied in Berlin with Mendelssohn's teacher. As a composer, many of the operas were melodramas or tragedies. The Merry Wives of Windsor was actually his only opera in German, to my knowledge, and the first and last comedy based on Shakespeare's play of the same name. So jumping right into the music, this etude is scored in B flat major, common time, with a tempo suggestion of Allegro moderato. Based on this indication, I suggest a performance tempo of 100, less or so. This technique is pretty dense, so if you don't feel comfortable playing it at the indicated tempo marking, you can definitely play it slower. This is definitely an etude where we're going for quality over quantity. In terms of the writing in this etude, the material that we're working with in this is loosely based on the flute and string melodies found in the overture from the Merry Wives of Windsor, using an array of arpeggiated lines separated by intervals ranging more than an octave. So as I said, if you don't feel comfortable playing this fast, this can definitely be a study that's working on quality of the intervals, the relationships in the voicing, the air. There's a lot going into this, although it does not look too hard. And I know we're only in B flat major, this is some challenging stuff. So, given the technical demands of the motive being used throughout this etude, I believe the main objective for this etude is going to be creating expressive melodic lines in a very challenging technical style. Like I just said, while B flat major may not seem like the most difficult key center to play in, it does provide some challenges that we'll cover in just a few minutes. All in all, while playing this etude, try to make sure that you're being as expressive as possible, even though the writing is objectively difficult. I think with etudes like this, I find that they're often some of the most rewarding to play because they force us to work on both technique and expression equally. Now, starting at the beginning of this etude, let's take a look at the way that this etude has been composed. For the most part, we have constant 16th notes that are often arpeggiated. We have ascending and descending sequences of 16th notes that are often separated by intervals of an octave or more, as well as a few scalar lines. All in all, quite technically dense from beginning to end. Warming up, I would suggest practicing octaves, twelfths, all forms of arpeggios, specifically B flat major and G minor, to really reinforce the concepts that will be stressed in this etude. As I've said in previous etudes, it's really good to shape your warm-up around the rep or etude that you're going to play. That way you save yourself some time and your fingers are already kind of primed and ready to tackle whatever is presented in the rep that you're actually playing. So when practicing this etude, I started with a very slow tempo of quarter note equals 50. You can definitely go slower to thoroughly understand the voicing demands that are needed to play this music. Since so much of this material tends to waver between the registers very frequently, knowing your instrument well will be the key to being able to play this with definite confidence. For me, I have been playing my clarinets long enough to know the fingerings that work for me, so it's generally easy for me to work through a new piece of music and know exactly how I'm going to practice it with more difficult sections. For those who haven't done it already, I would definitely suggest taking some time to play through the full range of your clarinet and write down the tendencies for each note of the instrument. I know it sounds a little tedious, but it's definitely a huge payoff once you can really understand exactly where the clarinet is landing for each single note. You can also go through this and take notes based on the intervals, map out the intervals with a tuner, really understand the tendencies, and I think from there you won't have to second guess as you're approaching these moments in the etude. So starting out, let's take a look at measures 1 through 13. I think working through this material alone should provide everyone with the tools necessary to play the rest of this study with ease. In measure 1, we're in the key of B flat major, and as mentioned before, although this key signature does not necessarily have a ton of flats or sharps, it can be deceptively challenging due to the frequent use of the bottom side key. For whatever reason, this side key can really present some problems because we have to use the index finger, which is a strong finger, and we're often lifting up a weak finger in the left hand. So let's take a look at this in context. We're going to be in measure 3. From beat 2 into 3, we have an F5 to a B flat 5 to an F5 to a D6. Playing between these 4 notes, we have a couple of options available to us. First, we can use the standard side key B flat 5. This option is probably the most reliable, but also presents some cross fingering, meaning that we have to alternate between the right and the left hand or vice versa to produce the actual notes. For instances like this, use a mirror. Really keep an eye on this right index finger to make sure that the movement is neither dragging or rushing. Make sure that the 4th finger is also not doing that. Typically, when we want to play a B flat major arpeggio such as this, the index finger is typically the culprit when it comes to the uneven motion. Also, for most intervals that involve the use of a B flat 5, I find that this particular interval is a little bit more cumbersome just due to the fact that we need to use the bottom side key. Personally, I try to keep my right hand positioned on the clarinet and my thumb rest positioned low enough or high enough that my right hand index finger is always kind of touching it. That way, if I need to access it, all I have to do is press in. If it's too low or too high, you're actually creating extra movement to get this key pressed down and then released, and it can also cause some delays or cause you to rush. So think about that. I would take a look at your thumb rests in relationship to the side keys. Make sure that the right hand is working with the left hand. Slow practice is your best friend with a metronome, as always. So next up, we have a second option for the B flat 5. We're going to be using a 1/1, as we call it, fingering for this B flat 5. It's going to be our thumb over the F tone hole, register key, first finger in the left hand and first finger in the right hand. Call this a 1/1. If you've never used this fingering before, it's a really great option for instances like this where we are playing intervals greater than a second. If you're going to be using this option, also keep in mind that this fingering tends to be a little unstable if the bridge key of the clarinet is not aligned. So really make sure that this is aligned before you try playing, especially before performance. There's definitely been instances where this was not aligned. I lucked out and it worked, but most of the time if it's not aligned, you're going to get a squeak. Also keep in mind that this alternate fingering tends to be slightly out of tune depending on the make and model of your clarinet. So take a moment to tune it and also know its voicing tendencies. Jumping just ahead to measure 7, we have a descending sequence of broken arpeggios. To bring out the melody outlined in this passage, emphasize the last and first 16th notes of each beat to bring out the stepwise motion. The same concept can also be applied to all similar instances throughout this etude. In measure 11, we are now going to be playing some very wide intervals that will require us to play with as little tension and biting as possible. For me, I found it easier to add brackets over the intervals that are going to give me a little more resistance. Just as a small reminder, not all these intervals are built equally, so you really have to understand your clarinet again, understand its tendencies. For me, I find that adding notes like this, the brackets on my score, can make it a little bit easier to anticipate the intervals that will require me to adjust my voicing for a very clean transition, especially for large intervals that span more than an octave. So when practicing larger intervals, I try to be a little bit more efficient and take apart the passage in a way that allows me to understand all aspects of what I'm doing. What I first recommend is taking apart the beat in a way that allows you to get to the upper note of the interval in order to tune it. So first, I would try aiming for the first note of the next beat. Once you reach this next beat, I would sustain it for either a beat or two, maybe more, understand the voicing, the tuning, the relationship between the fingerings. Oftentimes we're coming from shorter fingerings to longer fingerings or vice versa. Additionally, I also like to add a slight tenuto on the lower note of the interval as a way to prevent myself from rushing. It also gives me time to really feel like the interval is being expanded rather than compressed. Sometimes with these larger intervals, we tend to either voice higher before we need to, or the fingers move before they need to, or vice versa. So this is a really easy way to prevent you from rushing to the upper note, which is what we often tend to fear. Try not to be afraid of it. A note is a note as long as you are voicing it and giving it the right amount of air pressure. If the fingers are moving in time with slow practice, everything should work out very easily. So this is just one easy way to take this apart in a way that's a little more productive than just running it over and over and hoping that it works. And with that, we've reached the end of Etude 25 in Victor Polatschek's Advanced Studies for the Clarinet. Having reached the end of this masterclass, I hope you've gained a little bit of knowledge that prepares you for a very stellar performance in the future. In case you have any additional questions on this etude, as always, please feel free to comment below or send me an email. In the meantime, thank you so much for clicking today, and I'll see you next time for Etude 26. Happy practicing, stay safe, and see you again soon.